Good afternoon, and welcome to today's VetNet Entrepreneurship Track presentation entitled Social Entrepreneurship Series Hangout Number 4, External Operations. My name is Mike Shanek, and I'm the Program Manager for VetNet here at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, located on the campus of Syracuse University. Today's Hangout marks our culmination of our Social Entrepreneurship Series that we've been doing over the course of the month of June. I would like to remind you that if you've missed Hangout 1 through 3, please feel free to go onto YouTube and search VetNet Entrepreneurship Track, and you can access all of our past videos. Before we get started today, a few of our housekeeping notes. If you're participating live in the Hangout, please feel free to speak up with any questions during the duration of the Hangout, or you can type them in the chat box, which can be enabled by clicking on the left side of your screen and clicking the chat icon. For those of you who are watching out on our YouTube stream, please feel free to type your question out on the comment box, and I'll make sure it's relayed to our presenters. And finally, for those of you who are watching live and would like to type your question into the event page, you can do that as well. I'll now turn things over to Gary Shaheen, who will be moderating today's Hangout. And we also have Gregg Tripoli on the line, who's the Executive Director of the Onondaga Historical Association. Gary, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the fourth and the last of this series, as Mike said. So we began our discussion talking about the mission orientation and developing a core set of mission, the vision, the values that underlie social enterprises, move then to our internal operations. What are the nuts and the bolts that help your social enterprise come up to speed, develop a scale, and achieve its mission? Then we talked about financing enterprises and looking at sources of support for them. And today's discussion moves the lens to our constituencies, to our communities, and really answers or tries to answer the questions: how do we engage with our external environment, our partners, and what does that do to either enhance our mission and sometimes even challenge what it is we do as social entrepreneurs. So with that, let's go to the first slide. We're going to take a look at what we talk about as opportunity and identifying opportunities in the external market. So as you see here, a great social purpose venture and addressing its mission and trying to develop quality products might still fail in the marketplace. That is reaching its constituency, attracting investors, and so on, because the opportunities are either clear or not clear, or perhaps not even existent. So we have many instances where people are great visionaries, but yet they've not really read the environment especially right, and there really isn't a market for the products, the services, and the types of ventures an organization might create. So let's use one of our first presenters as an example. So in the first session, we had a presentation by the Veteran Beer Company, and if, for example, that Veteran Beer Company did not identify a market opportunity for the craft beers that it makes, then their overall mission opportunity will have been compromised and would have been very difficult to achieve. And as we heard from Paul in his presentation for the brew company, his bottom line was really employing veterans, reaching out and providing skills training and jobs for veterans in this industry. But he also had to take a look at what is the advantage of a potential beer type of a venture in his identified areas, his communities, and how he would distinguish himself and that product from the competition. So opportunity revolves around having customers, clients, and the users of those products and services that you create enough so that you can pay for your for the social enterprise, and your organization can meet its double bottom line. And as many of you heard from our first presentation, the double bottom line means addressing the mission of the organization, the social purpose, and also the business decisions and criteria that's going to help make your business a success. So in assessing opportunity out there in the market, however you define it, there are a number of questions that I'd ask you to think about. So let's go to the next slide, Jim. So what are the forces creating the opportunity? As you sit together with members of your steering committee or your board of directors, you know, how is your community experiencing the types of issues and concerns that really make a venture like yours potentially viable in your particular community? So for example, are you hearing from religious organizations that women veterans with children are frequenting the food pantries at a greater rate than they had in the prior year? What might that tell you about your enterprise that is seeking to serve veterans who are homeless? It might tell you that a rising constituency, an opportunity, if you would, to address your social mission could be that there are more women veterans with children who are falling below the poverty line, increased risk of homelessness, and that is one of the factors that you might want to consider in assessing an opportunity for your venture. Another criteria might be, what are the key success factors you need to consider to capitalize on an opportunity? That includes things like, of course, your internal operations, whether or not you have the staff, whether or not you have the board, whether or not you have the volunteers and the funding networks. Do you have the right stuff, in other words, to really make an impact in these areas of opportunity, and assessing that against what the community need might be. Another factor for you to consider in planning as you look at external operations is, how do you define your target market? Is your target market all veterans who are homeless, veterans who are only unemployed, veterans who are underemployed, veteran business owners? If you're going to start a business incubator, it's very important for you to define your target market. But you see, I put that in parentheses. You really have a couple of target markets, don't you? Your first target market are going to be those individuals or families who are directly going to advantage themselves by taking advantage of your services. Your other target market might be the target market of the investors, those donors who have an interest in serving the people that you're talking about, and you're also trying to satisfy what their needs are as well as a criteria for them giving you funding support or even buying your products for that matter. So assessing your competition is another thing you might think about, and it's really not true that we don't need to look at a risk assessment and a market assessment and a assessment of competition if we're operating a not-for-profit. In fact, especially these days as funds get exceedingly scarce, it's important for you to take a look at who is competing for the dollars out there in your area. So who else out there in your community proposes to serve veterans? And as many of you know, these days the market is quite full in organizations of all shapes and sizes and flavors that want to serve this nation's veterans. So the market could be fairly competitive in your community, and you have to make your voice known, and that's another reason for you to look at these external factors for your enterprise. Another factor for you to consider is, what do you know about the size and the growth potential for your market? Is homelessness increasing in your community? Is unemployment among younger veterans increasing in your community? Are local foundations that in the past did not give to veterans initiatives starting to advertise or make known through their constituencies that they're open to applications from organizations like yours to serve veterans? So taking a look at those opportunities is also important for you in this external scan. Is there a fit between those opportunities and your mission? We've seen many enterprises that have grasped at market opportunities, but it did not really help them achieve their vision and their mission, because in some ways it drew off resources. So for instance, if going back to the veteran beer company, if perhaps they became known as a top flight manufacturer of beers, but without that veteran serving mission, what is then the potential that the business itself overwhelmingly drives the way that organization goes, such that veteran priorities for hiring and support take a back seat? And we heard certainly that they try to keep those two in alignment. Another factor, is there a window for this opportunity? Is it in fact that right now, when you take a look at all the funding opportunities you have in your community and you scale them and you put them on timelines, that you realize that there are 3 or 4 of them whose windows for grant proposals closes within a month or 2, but that there are a number of grant opportunities that open in another 6 months. So how are you resourced and capable of achieving perhaps those shorter time frame opportunities as well as the longer time frame? So as you look at your external markets, also take a look at what are the relevant time frames and those windows for opportunity. And then, as Gregg is going to talk about, there are other windows to consider. If, as you develop your mission and your business and build your constituencies, you find that other folks come to your table and say that what you do and the way you think about social entrepreneurship is of value to us in other sectors that you may not have considered, and that allows you to expand your market and your enterprise to serve these new priorities, then that potentially could be a good thing. But again, as Gregg probably will also talk about, there's another danger there, and that is avoiding what we call mission creep. In other words, having your enterprise spread across too many constituencies to satisfy the resources you have in hand. And then what might you consider regarding other loyalties to other vendors? And so I had this experience directly as we were starting a arts council in one community, where the established funders for arts organizations gave to all of the big organizations, but really didn't address a lot of the emerging small avant-garde not-for-profits. And so how do we help those not-for-profits, those emerging enterprises, to take advantage of that funding pool when many of the large donors were very used to giving to their large-scale operas and their symphonies and so on? Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as we think about opportunities, we also want to think about our networks, and the networks are really, if you would, sort of the nuts and bolts of opportunity expansion. So networks I'm terming here as networks of people and agencies and organizations outside of the original venture that you might be interacting with. And then the question here is, how do you cultivate this network and ensure regular communication with their key members? And as, again, Gregg is going to talk about, how receptive will your organization be to the influences of these networks, who could either push you towards greater achievements or otherwise pull you away from your core mission? So I'm going to have one more slide here, and then a little bit of a summary, and then we'll give the rest of the time over to Gregg after I do a short intro. So Jim, let's go to my last slide, or next to the last slide here. Okay, so as you consider your networks, here are a number of questions that I'll offer to you, and then encourage you to perhaps put this into your strategic planning process. Who are your suppliers? Well, we know what that means if you have a for-profit business. Where are you getting your raw materials? But for a social enterprise, your suppliers are not only your resources, your donors, but also those that are going to get served directly by your enterprise. So who's making the referrals to your venture? How do your customers really know what it is you do, and who actually leads them to your doorway? Who are your interested constituencies? Well, these are, of course, not only those you provide service directly, but all those other organizations that have some skin in the game in the areas that you're involved in. How do you know about them? Where do you meet them? How do you find them? So you can learn from them and network them. They may also be good sources for you for boards, volunteers, or other types of legal or technical support. But these are the other types of factors you might need to consider as you think about your networks. To what extent can they be feeders for you for volunteers, for example? If other organizations share the same mission, does it necessarily mean that they also compete with you for resources? Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. But taking a good scan at the competition and those networks and their networks as well is going to help to position you better with your enterprise in the community. What marketing strategies might you consider? And by marketing strategies, I don't mean just a snazzy brochure here, a whole marketing strategy. How do you get the word out through public service announcements, through interviews, through meeting presentations, through your brochure, through social media, through all those interconnected marketing tools that you would use that frankly businesses know very well, but sometimes the not-for-profit sector doesn't take full advantage of the way they interconnect and can mutually support each other. And really building from that, what kind of technology might you use to reach your networks and your constituencies? Will it all be printed form? To what extent might you use apps or social media or those other types of mechanisms? And this sort of loops us back around to both opportunities and to networks, in that if your particular constituencies aren't all that well versed or resourced in the newer technology, then how do you reach them? And maybe part of your mission is to help them come up to speed on using these types of new methods to help improve their lives. So the summary that I want to provide you here before I turn it over to Gregg is that while we started with the mission and the vision and values and moved on to both internal operations and resources, a good social enterprise, an effective social enterprise, and one that will be sustained and grow also needs to take a clear look at its external constituencies, its market. How do you attach to it? How do you grow your enterprise through deepening your ties to your communities? And with that, I think that's a great segue over to Gregg Tripoli. And folks may wonder, here we are on a VetNet Hangout talking about social entrepreneurship to serve veterans, and Gregg is the executive director of a historical association in Onondaga, but we deliberately reached out to Gregg because he and his organization are a prime example of the way that socially relevant, socially purposeful enterprises can build upon their constituencies, develop a strong infrastructure, and sustain and grow their business, if you would, without losing sight of their mission. So with that, thank you, and I want to turn this on over to Gregg. Gregg, you're on, and hopefully we can tie you in.
Hi, Gary. Yeah, hopefully if you can't see me, you can at least hear me. I think probably I should start by talking a little bit about what OHA is, yes?
That sounds great.
So the Onondaga Historical Association, OHA, is an association of heritage-related, history-related museums, research and educational centers, and retail stores and attractions in central New York. And it is a 152-year-old organization, one of the oldest continuously operated historical organizations in the country, the oldest cultural organization in our community. It has, as many other art and cultural heritage art organizations have in the past, nonprofit organizations, was rather used to a pretty standard method of funding up until 2008. And so prior to 2008, there was a lot of government subsidies. There was a lot of large companies who would sponsor events and programs and things. And there was kind of a steady stream of people who were supporting organizations like OHA, like other nonprofit art cultural heritage. Beginning in 2008, of course, most of that went away, and many organizations found themselves in a quandary. They were not nimble enough to be able to adjust to the external factors, and in this case, the biggest external factor was an economic slump. And in that case, the companies were not doing as well as they had anticipated. They were not sponsoring things. People were concerned about the volatility of the economy, and they weren't being as charitable as they usually are. And government subsidies and funding dried up. So now my experience in nonprofit management lasts as long as I've been here at OHA, which is about 6 years. My personal history is that I do not come from history or museum or nonprofit background. That was lucky for us, as a matter of fact, because I had never been used to those sort of funding mechanisms, and so I was more used to creating earned income opportunities, and that, in fact, is what happened at OHA, and probably would have been a necessary move anyway. So first we looked at my concern was how to keep the organization.
Hey, Gary?
Yep.
Hey, yep, very good.
Sorry. Yeah.
Did someone have a question?
No, actually, I made a mistake. I muted you quick. But you can go back. So continue, please.
So basically, what we looked at was with regard to our community, how we could revitalize this 150-year-old organization. We needed to look for ways to increase earned income and contribute to our community, and of course stay true to our mission. So I think probably, Gary, the best thing that I can do is go through some of the examples that we did that kind of encapsulate this strategy.
I think so. Yep.
All of the examples that I'm going to use are part of a strategic plan that we developed that are not necessarily typical of historical organization strategic plans, but basically we were looking at adding value throughout our community, increasing our earned income, appealing to a wider audience, attracting more visitors and donors and members, and then, as I said, making money from our collections without having to sell them. So in an economic crisis, one of the first items that people and companies eliminate from their budgets, of course, is charitable donations, which hurts organizations like us. But it does make sense that the more prosperous that our community is, the greater chance that we would have to benefit from that prosperity. So we decided to focus on ways that OHA could directly contribute to the economic development of our community, which was also hurting. And we also wanted to position our products and services in a way that would add value. So companies would think of their contribution as an investment or as a payment for a valuable service, not just as a charitable donation, because companies these days, obviously, sponsors are looking for ways that they can benefit from their investment dollars as well. So one of the things that I realized OHA did really well was historical exhibits. I mean, we have a museum, and that's the sort of things that we did. And thinking about how we could use historic perspective to help our community and benefit OHA, we developed a new fee-for-service business line, which are customized exhibits that highlight the histories of local companies. Now, we have many companies in our community that have been in business for many years, 100, 75 years, even 50, 40 years. Yet most people, including many who worked at those companies, didn't know the stories of their great histories. The very idea of a historical exhibit, before you even read one word, speaks to longevity, adaptability, sustainability, relevance, all things that companies want to be known for. A company that tells its own story, though, amounts to really little more than advertising. On a credibility and trust scale, advertising ranks extremely low, near the bottom. On that same scale, historical organizations rank the highest in credibility and trust by the public. So, as I said, companies were somewhat reluctant to make an outright donation, but they understood the concept of return on investment, or paying for a service that adds value for them. So we do these exhibits that highlight their history, put them into a larger context, really kind of blow the horn of the company, talk about what they've done, how they've weathered the storms over the years, and they've been incredibly popular. The companies use these exhibits for marketing, PR, recruiting, even employee morale boosting. And most of them display these exhibits proudly, and these exhibits are now a major contributor to our earned income. And in the process, of course, we're not only helping to tell the great history of some of our great companies, but we're also helping to promote and strengthen our local businesses. Now, one of the weaknesses of OHA, another weakness of OHA, was its visibility in the community, despite being the oldest cultural organization. So our community's history is really incredibly rich here and fascinating, but nobody knew it, or us. And we believe that knowledge of our history can create pride in who we are. So what we're doing here is looking at increasing, pride of our community, pride in place, and history can help do that. It can help explain, who we are, what we've contributed to the world around us. It can help instill a determination to build and leave legacies that are worthy of our heritage. So, so what we wanted to do was is to include the community in the history stories that we're telling, so that we're increasing our audience. And one of the best ways for any organization to do this is through collaborating with other community organizations. From our perspective, history makes everything more interesting. It adds depth and meaning and substance. In short, it adds value. And collaborations can expose our partners' audiences to OHA while adding value to their products and services. So, for example, our community's media organizations are always looking for compelling content, whether it's television or newspaper or magazine or what. So we decided to, we have that content. We have amazing stories from our local history that people love to hear about. And what we decided to do was to provide that content in exchange for advertising. So now we're regular contributors to the local newspapers and Syracuse Media Group, which is the online paper, the Business Journal, the local magazines and other newspapers, local television programs. In the process, we get to bring the great stories of our history and content, our images and exhibits and things to a wider audience, often with a plug for one of our exhibits or collections in the text, and we get free advertising for our programs and even for our store products. So we're also adding value to our partners by providing them with some of their most popular stories and for their publications and productions. The collaborations automatically open your organization up to a new audience. And by helping to strengthen other partners in your industry, you begin to look at them, and they begin to look at you as not necessarily competition. So before, in the past, organizations, art and cultural organizations, in this community and many others, sort of looked at each other as competition, as competing for the same donor dollars, let's say, and competing for the same sort of art and cultural audience. OHA decided to take a different approach, and that is to embrace these other organizations, to use our product to add value to their product. We took the stance that a rising tide floats all boats, that it's all good. If we can get people interested in attending theater and museums and getting involved in art, culture, heritage, then it's good for everybody. So one of the collaborations that that we created or that we proposed includes other nonprofit organizations, organizations that traditionally have been considered our competitors. One is our professional theater, and the other is our public library system, which actually has a local history department. So OHA and the public library system in the past have kind of been at loggerheads. You know, we do local history, no, we do local history. And we decided to take the attitude that whoever does local history, it's all good, and it benefits all of us. So we approached Syracuse Stage, and we basically said, we'd like to add value to your product, and we think we can do that with history. And they said, okay, fine, but how do you think you can do that? But the point is that what a theater tries to do is to draw a connection between the audience and what's going on stage. The stronger that they can make that connection, particularly emotional connection, the greater chance the play has of being a success. They agreed with that. So we said that, you know, we would take a look at their upcoming season, look at the plays that they were doing, and if there was a local history connection somehow in there, we would do an exhibit that we would put in the lobby of the theater. Now, that kills a few birds with one stone. Number one, it gives people something to do when they go to the theater. Number two, while they're waiting for the show or during intermission. Number two, it gives them information about interesting parts of their local history that they probably didn't know before. And number three, because that history that we're highlighting in those exhibits is directly related to the production in some way, the theme, or the characters, the playwright, something about it, the time period, then they understand that something that happened that they're about to see or that they're seeing on that stage also happened right in their own backyard. It draws them closer to the production. And they said that, you know, that was great. Yeah, they agreed, but it, you know, that they couldn't afford it. And I said, that's fine, it's free. Then we went to the Onondaga County Public Library System. And they have, as I said, they have a local history department. So they also have a literacy mission. And so we proposed to them that we would take these exhibits that we did for the theater, and we would lend them to the library, where they would go on a traveling exhibit across all of the library branches. We would also offer to work with the library to create a reading list of journals and books and magazines and articles and other things that play off the different themes in the exhibit. So the library gets an exhibit about interesting pieces of local history, which is part of their mission, and the reading program also helps develop their literacy mission. They loved it, but said that they couldn't afford it, and I said, that's okay, it's free. And then what we did was go out to those companies in the community and basically gave them an opportunity to kill three birds with one stone, helping three great deserving local nonprofit organizations, OHA, the theater, and the library, helping to improve literacy in our community, helping to tell great educational stories about our local history that nobody knows. And basically, because of the length of time that these things were out in the community, it takes about 4 years for these exhibits to completely exhaust the trail, and they reach very conservatively in that time about 1.5 million people. Now these companies cannot get a billboard on the main highway here and reach more people, be out in the community for a longer period of time with a feel-good message. And this is a feel-good message. It's a great thing. People love these exhibits. They're extremely popular. I have never had to make more than one phone call to find a sponsor for these exhibits. And frankly, it's simply a function of, you know, they cannot get a better marketing opportunity and a better social responsibility opportunity than these. And this is really looking at your competition in a totally different way, bringing them into the fold so that you're building up, you know, the general art, cultural heritage industry working together. So now I want to, you know, go. I think probably it's best to speak specifically to our community and what, you know your customer, know your community, our entire community is really a target market for OHA, though there are certain people who, for whom history comes naturally, and that is generally when they have more of it themselves. But also, obviously, it's an important component to our educational process for K through 12, and so we also target those communities. But when we're listening to our community, or when we're thinking about what our main focus was going to be, this is about 6 years ago when I first came to OHA. I decided first, we should listen to the community. They'll tell us what they want. And sure enough, there were plenty of surveys, opportunities around for us to listen to what the community said that they wanted in order to encourage them to come downtown more often. So OHA is located right in the center of downtown. It's a downtown area that is on the rise. It's going through a resurgence. But the basic premise was to bring more people downtown, which would not only benefit OHA, but also other restaurants and other facilities. So we listened to the community. The top 4 things that the community said that they needed in order to come downtown was cheaper parking, more restaurants, fewer empty storefronts, and more retail stores. So we took those 4 things and decided to make those 4 things our priority, strategic priority for OHA. And those sorts of things, not exactly what one would typically think of as being any part of a strategic plan of a typical history museum or historical organization. But what we did is this. There's a parking garage that services our facility. It's practically next door. And so what we did was, it's owned by the city. And we lobbied the city for cheaper parking rate for a certain period of time, long enough for someone to come and maybe have lunch and then check out the museum. So, so they gave that to us. So now in that garage for up to 2 hours is the cheapest place in the whole city to park. Cheaper than any meter, cheaper than any other garage, cheaper than any lot. So not free, but much cheaper than any place else. Then we went on to, there was an empty storefront next to our building. It had been empty, literally adjacent to our building. It had been empty for approximately 6 years, I guess, by the time I came here. Nobody wants an empty storefront next to their place of business. Traditionally, of course, it wasn't something that an organization like OHA would be concerned with, or even felt that they could have anything if there was anything that they could do about it. What we needed, of course, was to draw people into our museum. Now, out of the general population, the percentage of people who like to, say, shop and eat out is very, very high. Out of the general population, the percentage of people who like to go to a local history museum is generally very, very low. However, I knew that once we got people into the museum, they would love it, because I knew the comments that people, oh, this is amazing, what a great gem, never knew this was here, et cetera, et cetera. We just needed to get them over the threshold. And one of the ways I felt that we could do that was with a restaurant, a history-themed restaurant. And so the empty space adjacent to our building, we made it a point for OHA to go out and find a tenant for that space who would turn that space into a history-themed restaurant. We added value to that restaurant in a number of ways. We decorated it with items from our collection. So sitting in there is like sitting in a museum exhibit. We created placemats for each of the tables, each of which was a little different did you know thing about local history. People love did you know stories about local history. It gave them something to do while they were waiting for their food. It gave them something to talk about while they were sitting at the table with somebody. So we had them do all our catering for all our events here. We did all our business lunches and things there. We brought them, we talked about them a lot. We wrote about them. We basically treated it as an extension of the museum. And then we also reformatted our building so that on our first level, which has the street presence, we created a large new retail store. that is, of course, a history-themed retail store. We do all of our own product development. And this gets into another, which I'll talk about very quickly, but retail product development. So we had this big space, and then we needed to fill it up with products. So we wanted the products to be exclusive to IHA. We wanted them to also meet our mission requirements, to be educational for the community, and so that allowed us to begin a whole new phase of collaboration with local arts, crafters, and other for-profit organizations. And basically what we've done is we have opened our collections. Now, we have amazing collections. One of our collections, for example, is Syracuse, China. Syracuse, China is a company that was here for 140 years, made china for hotels and restaurants and airlines and the steamship lines and railroads for 140 years. 140 years of amazing design and decoration, for which we own the copyright. So that's just one small part of our collection. But what we've done is to reach out for-profit companies, manufacturers, retailers, and others to collaborate with OHA, to work with us to use our collections, our vast collections, as inspiration to create products that will appeal to both our partners' market and our market. Obviously, we're a small organization. We can't afford to manufacture on a large scale, but our partners can. And so now what we do is create a whole line of products. So we are now in everything from the chocolate business to the beer business to creating home goods, everything from a drink tray that's modeled from a old beer tray that's in our collection. Syracuse is one of the brewing capitals of the country. Prior to Prohibition, we've developed a set of wine glasses that are decorated with designs from Syracuse, China. We do bar towels and dish towels from Congress beer, which is a great beer that was made by one of our local breweries, but has a really fabulous logo, and of course is good for areas outside of just central New York. With each of our products, we provide also the history behind that product, which adds value to that product. But basically what it does is this brings into play other partners. So we're helping to support, we had a great story. I don't have time to go into it now, but amazing, compelling story of this young girl in our history who lifted her family out of homelessness, literally, by making candy, which was her hobby. She turned her hobby into a business, which is kind of Entrepreneurship 101, became fabulously wealthy from this candy, discontinued it in 1933. A story came across our desk. It's a great entrepreneurial story. We found out that her only child, she married late in life, had one child, is still alive. We worked to deal with him, got the copyright for the original candy recipes. We're now working with a local entrepreneur to manufacture that candy exactly according to original recipes. So it's a great story from our local history, great entrepreneurial story, great female entrepreneurial story. She was also a patron, tremendous philanthropist, so it's a great story about giving back as well once you've attained success. But now also people can taste the candy. Our requirements were that the manufacturer not deviate at all from the original recipes and use local ingredients whenever possible. So these kind of products are supporting local industry, they're supporting local entrepreneurial business, and of course they're supporting the oldest cultural organization in town. It's really about listening to that community. They told us what they wanted. We just gave them what they said they wanted, and they've been tremendous in response. Obviously, I think I'm probably at the limit here, Gary. So
I think that was excellent, Greg. Excellent. And what you give us here is another perspective on the entrepreneurial vision beyond just an enterprise, but really a creative, innovative way of seeing your place in the community and adding value to the community in indirect and direct ways. I think it's wonderful. Mike, do we have any questions from the audience?
I do not see any questions out there as of now, Gary.
Okay. Well, Gregg, I actually have a question or two for you, and it might help our members of the audience to think about these as well. So how tough was it to get your board on board with these types of changes from your traditional historical association to this expansive vision you've talked about?
Well, some were more amenable than others. You know, there were some hardcore sort of museum folks who felt that it was not our position or our job to go beyond the general job descriptions of a regular museum.
Mm-hmm.
We obviously were moving into retail and consulting and things like that, which they felt were we're not germane to the actual mission
Mm-hmm.
of the organization. Though my argument is that those were the things that allowed us basically to stay in business and
Right.
to keep our museum free,
Mm-hmm.
and to increase awareness. I think that there's been the board hired me knowing that I didn't come from a museum or nonprofit background, so they were obviously looking for a different perspective. So we did a lot of things quickly, which was somewhat disconcerting to the board.
Yeah.
They at several occasions asked me to slow down, which isn't my natural pace. So, but we had a lot of things to do. I mean, the organization was not healthy. It was not doing that well, and we needed to turn things around in a pretty quick manner. I also had a fair amount of pushback from staff. There are a lot of people who had been here a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 years later, and I'm still working with some of the same people in kind of changing the perspective. Historians are typically very close to the vest. It's kind of like collecting something that was for them and them alone.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it was really just the opposite. It was about how we use that to bring it out into the community and add value to the community. How we can show the community that we can add value to them using these things, and about customer service. That's not an easy thing to do when you're dealing with the public. When you now all of a sudden have a retail store and research facilities and people who, of course, want everything for nothing.
Yeah.
It's important to pay attention to community service.
Mm-hmm.
Customer's always right. Service with a smile. We are here to serve them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's been a difficult kind of transition. So all along the way, whenever you're trying to change something or do something new, you have those people who doubt you. In the art and cultural field, I'm kind of the greedy guy who just cares about money, and it's been there's been some transitions both inside the organization and outside with our industry. I'm not someone who believes in really talking too much about quality of life issues. Yes, we certainly do add to the quality of life, but that's difficult to quantify.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I'm more about how we can quantify what it is we do,
Mm-hmm.
that shows what we bring economically to the table. And the rest of the art and cultural community is not feels that being swayed by the almighty dollar is kind of a sellout in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Great answer. And Mike, my guess is that we're probably out of time. What do you think?
We are. I think we're about ready to wrap up, Gary, unless you or Gregg have any closing remarks that you'd like to end with.
Well, actually, I'll just say that this has been a pleasure. Mike, thanks to you and to Jim and the IVMF team for putting these social entrepreneurship pieces on. And Greg, thank you so much for today's presentation. Do you have any closing comments or words of advice to our audience out there that's going to listen to this on YouTube? And
no, just that, think of a nonprofit. It's a way. It's really a way that you can do good and do well. A nonprofit organization does not mean that you need to struggle. You can thrive, you can grow, you can add a tremendous amount to your constituency through nonprofit, and so please do consider that as a career path.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, Mike, over to you for closeout.
Very good. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Gary. Again, for those of you watching live or those of you who may be watching out on our YouTube channel, just a reminder, this was the culmination of our 4-part social entrepreneurship series. Just to run through what those 4 parts were again, session 1 was principles for making meaning, forms and functions of social enterprises. Session 2, we discussed internal operations. Session 3, we talked about financing your venture. In session 4, which was today, we talked about external operations. We appreciate all of you who have reached out to us with your questions, all of those who have viewed the presentations, and we encourage you to spread the word on these presentations to your network by sharing the links to these. And you can always reach out to myself or Gary, and we can put you in touch with one of the speakers, or we can hopefully answer your questions ourselves. So wrapping up, from all of us here at the IVMF and the VetNet team, we thank you. We thank the presenters, and thanks, Gary. Have a great day, and we'll see you all soon.
Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.